one way to think about it, which is how to engage. But the question is, where's it going? Because we all come from a mindset, I think, where you will have a traditional four-year university degree. We push our kids in that direction and so forth. And yet, what I heard us talking about up here is that the vast majority of students in this country are not in a four-year program. The vast majority of the needs of the business community are not for those kinds of educational outputs. So we've got to think about things differently. We really have to start celebrating the output of what CED calls the broad access institutions, which include community colleges, technical schools, and so forth. And in fact, if you look at the vast shortages, we were talking in the last panel about cybersecurity shortages, you're looking at healthcare shortages, you're looking at dental hygienists. We can't find enough dental hygienists in this country. I mean, these are not four-year education degrees, and yet they are very high-paying middle-class jobs. And I think we have to, as a society, move in our prejudices towards a certain form of education and really start embracing other forms. As the demand for high-quality talent has risen, so has the need for an education system that can do what I just said. CED has produced several resources as part of our College and Career Readiness project that further supports this perspective. That includes a new white paper, which CED has co-sponsored with the Business Roundtable, and a mobile app. So again, for those of you in the Twitter age, if you have a smartphone, it's Android or iOS based, you can go and you can just search on business, the number 4 readiness, business for readiness, and what will come up is an app that will be co-branded CED and BRT, Business Roundtable, and will go into our college and career readiness standards. It has a lot of other resources on there that I hope you can find. So that's Business for Readiness. Now everybody's going to be looking at their phones, and that used to be rude, but now since we're in the Twitter age, it's not rude at all. You're just retweeting what's being said. More information on this, of course, are on the tables, the sheets on the table in front of you. We're now pleased to have David Levin lead our second panel on how education can meet the needs for a talent pipeline. It's my pleasure to introduce David, but before doing so, I want to first offer my congratulations to panel member Pedro Noguera on this occasion of his induction into the National Academy of Education this week. David Levin is the president and CEO of McGraw-Hill Education. It's a digital learning company that provides customized education content, software, and services for pre-K through postgraduate education. I had the opportunity to teach for a couple of years as an adjunct professor, and I was shocked, surprised, and thrilled with the output that McGraw-Hill has provided to teachers and professors, and it's just an incredible wealth of content. David has served as chief executive of Symbian Software, which built the operating system for the first generation of smartphones. Thank you, David, for doing that. Did you also invent the internet? I just want to know up front here. He's also the former chief executive of UBM. That's not IBM, that's UBM, a national media company. So David and panelists, welcome and thank you for being here.
Great. So while my colleagues come up to take their chairs, let me just thank the previous panel and in particular Bob for handing us on such a rich debate and such a fulfilling discussion. So thank you around that. I don't think that anybody can pick up that challenge and feel adequate to it, but we'll do our best. Quickly, let me introduce my colleagues here. Bill Goodwyn has spoken already today, but I think, apart from being the president and CEO of Discovery, it's worth just reflecting on the fact that in his time there since, I guess, 1987, that business has changed and completely redefined how we consume and distribute content in myriad ways. And currently, they have access to, I think it's 100 million households across the United States. So that's just an extraordinary thing to bring to the table. Pedro Noguera, who we've just heard, has just got this fantastic accolade. Apart from the fact that he's the professor of education at NYU and a published author and the executive director of the Metropolitan Center for Research on Equality and the Transformation of Schools, it would seem that he's very well qualified to be here. And apart from that, he was also a classroom teacher, so he's done the real thing. Stefanie Sanford comes to us obviously from the College Board, where she runs all of their policy and advocacy, and before that had a decade at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in those capacities, she's obviously been at the center of watching and contributing to the debate on how we shift education. And finally, Jon Whitmore, who, apart from anything else, we're delighted to have with us today. He's just landed from Hong Kong, so many, many thanks for that. Former president of two schools, Texas Tech and San Jose State, and now, of course, the CEO of ACT. So it really brings a richness to this debate. And then you've got this bloke with a foreign accent. And what am I doing here? So very quickly, I'm 8 months into being in the United States, actually the third time I'm here. My background was software and media. And McGraw-Hill, which is a 125-year-old esteemed company in education, has to find a future beyond the textbook. And I'm pleased to say we're well on the way. We can talk about that at a different point. But as of this point in the year, slightly more than half of our revenues in higher ed now come from software rather than high-priced textbooks, which is giving us a chance to address both affordability and, most importantly, driving outcomes. And we're working with great colleges and schools to do that. Let me begin this little discussion by sharing a couple of anecdotes, because in these months leading up to this panel, I've been sort of on an immersion tour of the US education environment, in fact, the global education environment. And I wanted to share just a couple of little anecdotes to illustrate the challenge of futurology in education. I was with a district called Minhang in Shanghai, which some of you will no doubt know. It's probably the highest performing school district in the world, and talking to them actually about programs in love and dance. But along the way, they shared with me an interesting statistic, which is a point of pride to them, which is that their 6th grade in math can beat any, and they believe any, US school at 12th grade. Kind of an interesting fact. I was down in Arizona at a conference, and I was listening to how people were describing the future of our world, and it was full of wonderful, exciting technology and high bandwidth, and the entire event was in English. And then I went with one of our sales reps to the local high school, which was essentially Mexican and had very, very poor connectivity, very, very low levels of attainment, and there was no dialogue between these two groups. I was at Kennesaw State in Atlanta, and one of the interesting things out of meeting a group of about 120 students there was I said, what are you all doing? You know, how many of you in work? And all of them were in work. How many of you do one job? That was 60%. And then how many of you do 2 jobs? And that was 40% of that room, doing 2 jobs or being in full-time employment while they're doing school. And finally, I was at a community college of a big metropolitan area, sort of many tens of thousands of students there. And I was speaking to effectively the chief executive of the organization, and she said, well, we're really proud. We've doubled graduation rates to 13%. And I said, wow, 30% doesn't sound great. And she said, you're being very polite, David. We've reached 13% graduation. So on that sort of background, we're all struggling with the future of these tensions. Let me sit down and open up with the first question, and if I can, I'll direct that one to Bill, which is that the future is always defined by the interplay of what is abundant and what is scarce. So as you, leading Discovery, have looked out at that world, what are the resources that are abundant and what are those that are scarce? And then we'll play out some other questions amongst the group.
It's a great question. I think one of the things that's scarce, I think we all know, is the economics that people have. That's always going to be a pressure in the system around the economy. I think what's going to be abundant is access to information. And I think technology is helping drive the interplay, because as technology continues to advance, it gives us the ability to have access to information that actually brings down the cost and makes things more productive to people and makes society better. I mean, just a couple of examples. We talked earlier in the K-12 education space, the economic pressures and the economics are scarce for the school districts, so they have to find innovative ways to do things differently. And that leads the transition to digital. It's more efficient, it's more effective, it costs less, but performs better. If you think about even in media, right, or other industries, access to information and technology has driven us ways to do things differently that are more enhanced for society. Amazon has broken down the barriers of shopping, right? There's no geographical barriers anymore. You look at Uber, right? Uber's valuation is about $18 billion, yet they don't own a single vehicle. But it's given us a better way to access information and a better way to have transportation. So I think it's really access to information.
Great. So in light of that, sort of just thinking about what do we do with all of this? What do we think the purpose of education? Sorry. Okay. In light of that, big echo. In light of that, with this changing world that we're confronting and the different plays of supply and demand, why are we doing this? Stefanie, what's the purpose of all this education?
Well, so I think you've got a broad purpose and a specific purpose. I mean, the broad purpose is to help equip, young and build strong individuals to be successful in adult life. And then the more sort of specific purpose is to actually help young people find their passions and their skills. And I think there's, and ways to get really specific about that. That's going to be ultimately the key to opportunity. And I want to thank CED. CED has always done a terrific job of sort of bringing the business community into a broader discussion, not just about workforce development, but the idea of the interplay between business and society as being integral to opportunity. And I do think as we work to get more specific about how do you deliver opportunity, this idea of how Uber and some of these other have been very clear about that. We talk about now sort of how do you use assessments to deliver opportunity. I mean, there's a giant debate, real volatility in the education debate in America now about testing, too much testing. There's a real backlash. And I think what's happened is that debate misses the point. That the point really is we don't need more tests, we need more opportunity, and how do we do that? And I think your Uber example is an interesting one. So if you think about so we have an assessment, the PSAT, that's most predictive of success in AP classes, so rigorous courses. So one of the greatest skills gaps, the one that's probably most vivid now, and probably most vivid to those in the room, is the idea of STEM. Is that we've got whether it's 5 million open jobs or 1 million open STEM jobs. Well, what we found out is last year alone, based on PSAT, there were hundreds of thousands of young people who showed STEM potential, and 60% of them did not take a single AP science course. 60%. That's 215,000 students that, based on a predictive exam, did not take a science course that they were qualified for. So how do we get them to do that? Because what we know is if they do take that course, then they're more likely to enroll in STEM courses in college, they're more likely to graduate, they're more likely to be successful. And so as we think about sort of bite-sized, both the interplay between things like assessment and technology and outcomes, and as well, how can we be more specific about that in helping guide them forward?
Great. And so, Pedro, as you then survey the educational landscape, how relevant is the classic structure of the 2- and 4-year school, and what do you see coming and emerging?
Well, I would say there's a huge gap between the needs of our society and the way we're preparing young people now. And we heard several of the panelists already discuss that. Part of that gap, I think I might take issue with that about the testing. We heard a number of business leaders already talk about the kinds of skills that young people need in the workforce today. What's happened in this country over the last 15 years is that we've used assessment as the gauge to determine how kids are performing. And so what's happened in schools is that schools know they're going to be judged by test scores, So increasingly, only what's on the test is being taught, right? And so lots of things are on the test. In some states, science is not even offered in the 4th grade. So you see science being reduced in value. You also see that the kinds of skills that are needed in the workplace, like critical thinking, like problem solving, like the ability to collaborate, aren't easily tested, right? You don't get a multiple choice test at work about what you're going to do today, right? And so we've allowed the testing to be misused and to have I think, a too much influence over what we're doing. And what we should go back to is using testing as a tool to provide good feedback on what students need and to make sure they get it right now. We test the kids in the spring. We give the teachers the results in the fall when they no longer have the students. So we use testing to rank and to measure, but we don't use it to inform judgments about what children need more of. I would also say this, and it's very easy to blame education, but I think our whole society is on the hook for this. I would argue we love football more than we love children. Right now, in several states across the country, the highest paid public figure is a football coach. New Orleans, after Katrina, schools weren't open for years in certain communities. The Saints were up and running within 6 months and in the Super Bowl. You know, there's a little town in Florida called Belgrade outside of West Palm Beach. Dirt poor. They produced more professional football players than any town in America for the last 20 years. If we care about something, we make it happen. We put resources into it. If we treated education that way, it should not be the case that if you grow up on the border in South Texas, you're going to get an inferior education than if you grow up in the suburbs of Houston. But that's what is happening all across America today. And that's what we've got to address.
It's quite an interesting statistic that I found as I browsed through the economics of our own business, is that just under 2% of all spending in the United States on education goes on instructional materials, which is slightly more than AstroTurf, but only just. So, I mean, Jon, as you think about assessment in a more broad sense than testing, and also link that to subsequent performance, what is the role of, or what can we do to improve the retention rates, the success rates in college? And does assessment have a part in that? And what do we need to do around that?
Well, university retention and persistence to graduation has a lot to do with how well students are prepared when they get there. So if you look at the really highly selective schools, and if you look at how much tuition they charge, those two components are the major reasons why everyone graduates in 4 years. They're all really well prepared, and two, they cost so much that parents won't let them stay beyond 4 years. Now, having said that, there's a lot of students who need more help in order to be successful at universities. And every university I know is working pretty hard on this. And it has to do with getting the right fit for the student to go to the right school so that they feel comfortable there. It has to do with better counseling in the high schools as well as once they arrive at the institution. It has to do with writing tutoring programs and math tutoring programs that are available. And so every university that I've been associated with is continuously investing to make sure that those components of reasons why students might drop out are being taken care of so students can be more successful. So most schools in America, universities, I think the graduation rates or retention rates are going up because they're actually working on it, but it's still not nearly where it should be. And the bottom line is assessments, no assessments, a lot of kids just aren't ready to be competitive at the college level. We do a survey where we survey senior teachers in high school and say, how prepared do you believe your students are for college? And they'll say 80-some% well or very well prepared. And then we survey the faculty at the universities who teach those entry-level classes, and it's more like they feel 23% or so of the students are prepared. So, so there is a gap there. And the real answer is higher standards for students so that they are ready.
And Bill, just thinking about how we deliver that education, what are the changes that you think we need to make in the shape of delivery, or are there changes that you think we need to be aware of that are coming in light of those factors?
Well, in terms of some of the changes in education, I want to just echo what Pedro said. I couldn't agree more with what his point was, and I think it goes back to, if you read what John Dewey said in, I think it was 1930s, he's a famous education philosopher, reformist. He believed that society and schools have a symbiotic relationship, and I couldn't agree with that more. He believed the purpose of education was that we need to give the young the things they need to be successful in society. We say the same thing today, we just say it a little bit differently. The last panel was talking about, preparing our students or preparing the young so they're career, college, and citizenship ready. So it's the same thing, we say it differently, but we say the same thing. But what do we need to do to, enhance the educational outcomes? First of all, I think, again, I said it earlier today, it's invest in teacher quality. The number one factor about quality education is the quality of the teacher, the impact they can make on a student. If we think about all of us in this room today, we have workforce, right? We have talent. We invest in that talent, right? We nourish that talent. Why don't we do the same thing with our educators, right? We need to support them and give them the development and the tools that they need as well.
Great, and sorry.
I'd like to comment on that because I'm 100% behind what you just said. I just finished.
And you can let him talk for much longer than that.
I just finished visiting one of the top 10 high schools in Shanghai, and the respect they have for the teachers, and then proportionally the amount of money they pay them relative to other professionals is extremely different than what happens in America. And that's why Singapore, Shanghai, those places have such high test scores is partially because of the quality of the teaching, the programs they put them through, and more importantly, how much they pay them as real professionals.
And if I can build on that, I mean, those are definitely positive characteristics. Those societies often are much more homogeneous, and the equality of opportunity that people have got is more level. And Pedro, how do we get access to better opportunities for all children?
Well, I keep thinking about, Shanghai's come up a couple times, and one thing we should know about Shanghai is there is a large number of kids in Shanghai who don't even go to school, who are not even being assessed, because they are considered non-citizens, or they don't have the same rights because they're internal migrants. So, and unlike our country, where every child, including the undocumented, has the right to an education. So, not to say that they're not doing great things in Shanghai schools, it's just they're not serving everyone, right? And they're not, the principle of equity isn't there. I would say, so that's the good thing about our country. The times in our country when we've made the greatest progress in history is in the 1950s, when we were concerned about educating veterans, and we significantly expanded access to higher education, and the 1970s, when we also were concerned about access to higher education. As a student going to college in the 1970s, I didn't have to worry about paying for it. Pell Grants were there. We heard another panel talk about how college is so far out of reach. We're talking about students taking on debt that they will be paying off into retirement. It's unconscionable that we've allowed this to develop the way it has. And it's coming at our own peril. So there's so much that we need to do to address the equity issue. I often say that, what are the most equitable systems in our country? Most of them are in transportation. Right? A New York City subway system is probably the most equitable system in the world. 4 million people a day take that system. And whether you enter the poorest neighborhood or the wealthiest neighborhood, you're going to get pretty much the same service. You might see a rat or two, but you're going to get more or less affordable, clean, and because of that, you will see CEOs and homeless people together on the subways. What other system brings everyone together? Now, it's also true you can't drive in New York because there's too much traffic, but we need to think of schools as a vital part of our social infrastructure. And it should not be that depending on the neighborhood you're in, you're going to get a very different education. The statistics you cited about access to AP courses. Why does that happen? Because many schools can't even offer AP courses. They don't have someone qualified in the school to teach the class.
Yeah, actually, it's about what we find of those who actually show AP potential. About 2/3 of them, though, have the class in their school. But you do see these implicit biases that say, so how do you work with counselors? How do you go direct with kids to parents to say, you have potential, you can actually do this? Not only does that help with preparation, it does flip the assessment notion from one of punishment to one of identifying and cultivating opportunity and skill. But no, the harder point is absolutely right. 1/3 of those kids are in schools where these advanced courses don't exist, and we have to do something about that.
So, Stefanie, you've got this fascinating role in the College Board, but also this great experience from beforehand with the Gates Foundation. And we were just talking about the challenges of changing healthcare and contrasting that where the foundation's made dramatic progress with the system in education, which is much tougher. What do we need to do to get education moving in some consistent directions? How do we organize that?
You're giving me all the sort of easy questions, huh? No, I will, the irony is that in the question as we were talking about, the questions in healthcare at the Gates Foundation, if you're looking for a polio vaccine or a vaccine, that is inherently a technocratic problem. I mean, there are people involved in it, but it isn't nearly as sort of as complicated an endeavor and sort of fraught with different values and democratic values and processes. So, I think, I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare the two because they certainly are. Finding an AIDS vaccine or a cure for polio is very different because there won't be, as much as we'd like that, there won't be just one shot that you can give somebody that will ultimately, improve their own education or an educational system. And so, I guess the cliche is there isn't a silver bullet, and actually in vaccines there sure might be. Right?
Do other panelists have a view on that?
Well, I think the way to solve the educational shortcomings in America is to have all sectors working together is the only way. That is business. And that's one of the values of CED, and what it's trying to do, I think, is to bring business people together with educators, together with people from government, and really people from the media to see if all those groups can come together behind a better future for all of our kids. And I think only if all of those components are working together can we make a major shift in improving the quality of education.
Yeah, I'd like to add one point on the equality issue. And I think that's, again, one of the great things that you're seeing in education today. The innovation actually helps the equality issue. Miami-Dade, 4th largest district in the country, Alberto Cavallo is the superintendent. We started working with them on a digital learning transition about 4 years ago. But he wasn't ready to scale it district-wide. It's a huge district. It's a minority-majority. So he said, I want to start in Title I schools. And if you ask him why he wanted to start in Title I schools, he'll tell you, he said, look, these are the kids that don't have access at home. If we don't give them the tools in the classroom, 21st century tools, we're going to leave them behind. If you think about if you're interviewing for a job, Fortune 500 companies, 80% or more, you have to go online to fill out a job application. So if we don't give these tools to the kids in the classroom, they may never get them at home. So I think that's a perfect example. That's an example of a large urban district, but some of the rural ones, they have the same kind of challenges. It's very expensive to wire rural districts. The cost is so much greater, but you're seeing great innovation going on there too. So Anson County, the district superintendent there, believed we've got to do something to give everyone access. He started putting Wi-Fi's in laundromats. So what you want to do is give everyone access. So.
I would just add, I think it would be really helpful, and this is where I think the business community could play a major role, in making education a nonpartisan issue. It should not be the case that depending on who the governor is or the president, that's going to shift our policies one way or the other. We should do what we know is right for our country and for our kids, regardless of who's in office, right? And we should make sure, and this is where the business community plays a role, because it's not enough to prepare kids for the jobs that exist now. We've got to prepare them for the jobs that don't even exist yet. So they have to have the mindset to both be able to engage in continuous learning and to solve the problems that we're going to pass on to them. And we're passing on a lot to these kids, right? They're going to need some creativity, and that's the reason why the whole way we teach kids needs to change. The average 12-year-old is more comfortable with technology than their teacher, right? What do we do in school? We take that smartphone away because we don't want them texting, but that's a tool that could potentially be used. How does a child learn to play a video game? They don't download a lecture first. They learn by doing. They learn through their mistakes, and they learn through mastery. How often do kids get to learn through mastery? Right? Not happening. And so there's a lot about the way we learn that needs to change. And that is, I think, a role industry could play in rethinking a lot of the way we presently provide education to children.
Pedro, just to build on that, I think it's quite interesting that in any child's playing on video games, they deal with failure admirably. The characters die.
They die.
They just pick up and go on. And yet, in the context of the sort of testing that you've described, the difference between a formative test, positive feedback, and a crushing blow, which just diminishes somebody's confidence, is really striking.
Yeah, that perseverance is incredibly helpful, and they're learning it, like you said, failure with games.
And just to illustrate the point of using testing as a tool. So I go from my annual physical, doctor says, oh, your blood pressure's a little high. He says, but I think you have white coat blood pressure. I said, what's that? He said, whenever the guy with the white coat comes, your pressure goes up. He says, get your own pressure kit, take it at home on a regular basis, and come back to me, because we want to see what the average is over a month. So I do, and guess what? I'm fine, right? If you're using testing as a tool, we'd want to assess our kids regularly, not say one testing situation is going to determine where you are. You know how many kids are not even taking the test seriously? They hear recess is coming after, so they're filling it out quickly. We don't even know if the test is accurately representing what they can do. And this is just one of many problems with the way we're using testing right now.
Bill, you raised the challenge of the status of teachers. Oh no, sorry, that was John. John, you raised the challenge of the status of teachers. And how can we go about raising the game and helping teachers get the respect and status that would make a difference to all the aspects of getting more great people in? Because at the moment, you know, the absolute pick of the crop of young graduates are trying to go in to Teach for America or its equivalents around the world, and it's very exciting to see that passion exercised there.
You know, there's really no easy answer. I think it's important that America finds some way of putting more special emphasis on the importance of teachers. I visit high schools all the time, and the ones that I see that appear to be the most successful, and I'm talking about public schools, are ones where there's an incredibly dedicated principal who's managed to bring into that institution in some way or another really dedicated teachers. And when you get all of that working right, and there are schools in America where all of that is working right, it's really exciting to behold. The quality of teachers, what's happening in the classroom, that will never change. If there's quality teaching in a classroom, then students are eager to learn, and so I think it's partly a matter of principals as well as the teachers themselves, because the schools that I've visited that appear to be really successful have some pretty amazing principals who then allow the teachers some freedom within the curriculum or whatever to bring the best out of their students. And so the more we can train that whole cadre for the future to allow for that kind of thing. And then to pay them better, too, is really critical to keep them there.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. One example of exactly what Jon was talking about, I'll use Wake County, North Carolina. The assistant superintendent there is a guy named Todd Wirt. He came from Mooresville, North Carolina. So if you know the Mooresville story, I'll just give it to you very quickly. It's where President Obama announced the Connected Ed initiative a couple years ago. Mooresville was one of the leaders in a digital transformation. If you go to that district, elementary school, middle school, high school, there's not a single printed textbook in the entire district. It's all digital. Now, fast forward, what does that mean? Well, here are the statistics on Mooresville. It's about, North Carolina has 117 districts in the state of North Carolina. They're 100th in pupil spend, so they're spending almost the least amount per pupil. But they're second in the state in graduation, third in student achievement. Now, the reason I'm telling you that story is Todd Wirt was a former principal in Mooresville. So he went to Wake County, assistant superintendent, so they're now making this digital transformation. So what do you think the first thing that he did was? Well, first of all, he didn't go out and buy a bunch of technology. That was the last thing he did. What he did was he focused on a 3-year professional development plan to get 12,000 teachers to build capacity so they can deliver great instructional practice. His point was this: technology is a tool. I'm never going to give the technology and put it in the hands of students until I know my teachers know how to provide great instructional practice. So it's that focus on the professional development that Jon was just talking about. It's important.
But I don't want to lose Pedro's point about the nature of student work, because there's a big idea happening in here, which is that we talk a lot about the principal work and the teacher work, and clearly that those are the backbone of a great school. But what we're talking about here is what needs to change is the work that students do, that it is more active, that it is more, that it's more towards practice. And so how do the systems do that? I mean, if you think about even the examples about video games, and I mean, video games do nothing but bury the test. I mean, because you're trying to get better all the time, and they get better all the time, and that becomes, the notion of measurement becomes a challenge, and they work at, as a result of that challenge, to get better and better at it. So how is it that we animate that, right? That the nature of the work that students actually do really sort of prepares them for what comes next, and that seems like, bringing, whether that's higher ed or the business community, because, I mean, what we're preparing young people to do is to work in the world, whether they're working in civic life, whether they're working in college, whether they're working in our business enterprises. That's what we're teaching them to do. And so, I mean, Debbie Meyer, one of the sort of great progressive educators, say that young people need to come into contact with a range of adults they can see themselves becoming. So if you mix that idea, which is that they meet all different kinds of adults, not just those who are paid to be in schools, but also the nature of the work they do allows them to practice and get better in the very things that are going to have them be successful when they get out. It seems to me that's the big idea of at the heart of your question of what education needs to become.
And Stefanie, here we're going into a world where there is more software being used when it's appropriately supporting instructors and supporting teachers and giving more feedback to students and instructors about who's doing well and badly. How from a policy standpoint, do you balance the necessity of just those massive flows of data, which are hugely positive and powerful to assist effective education, both for the people who are flying and the people who are struggling? Both groups thrive. How do you balance that with the privacy questions?
I think it's probably the thorniest question we need to deal with right now. Absolutely. I mean, the student individual privacy is absolutely paramount. And so, how do you balance the trade-off of information that allows you to really customize and personalize and be able to get this kind of real-time feedback so that you're not relying on just this one, this one moment in time that is, rather that it goes on, in an ongoing way. I think policymakers are really struggling with that. I think it's going to be one of the biggest issues they're going to be dealing with here. And I think your framing of the question is exactly right, which is, how are we absolutely serious about maintaining student privacy, but be able to unlock the potential for personalization and hugely improved instruction and student work that access to this kind of real-time data would provide?
We're sort of moving towards a close here, but I'd like to ask each of the panel. When we were at lunch just before, I said, if you had one message for this group here, clearly this is an incredible audience of people, and one of the exciting things about what the CED has done here is brought together the many threads which are required for there to be progress. What's the takeaway that each of you would ask of the people in this audience to go away and actually make a difference? And why don't I follow the left to right principle here?
ACT does a lot of surveys, and one of the surveys we did recently was ask parents what they want for their children, and it was fairly consistent. They want their kids to be happy, they want them to have friends, they want them to have a good job that they like and where they can make a difference. That's what parents want. I bet that's what you want for your kids. I want that for mine. And so I agree that if we can put partisan things aside and realize we all want that for our kids, and by the way, parents in Shanghai want that for their kids too, then we can get something together, but only if we work together.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for business and society to play in education. So what I would encourage you to do is, figure out, what that role can be, and you can do it a couple of ways. One is, in higher ed, for example, you heard some of the panelists before talk about workforce apprentice programs, right? Siemens does some great work with high school apprentice programs, also two-year college, community colleges. Same thing with four-year degrees. Northrop Grumman has a program on honors of cybersecurity at University of Maryland. There's so many ways that you can get involved on the K-12 side. You saw an incredible commitment from Intel earlier today. So every district has different needs and different goals. There's no silver bullet. One district may be focused on, increasing effectiveness with English language learners. Another district may be focused on student engagement to decrease the dropout rate. Another district may be focused on STEM and science literacy and science engagement. So every single district has unique goals and opportunities for the business and society to come together to support educational attainment.
Let me say something about teaching, because that's obviously a key ingredient in this whole situation. I want you to ask yourself now, if you had a very high-achieving child at home, would you want them to be a teacher? And not a Teach for America teacher, who's going to do it for 2 years to get into grad school, but a teacher who chooses this as their profession. We are not preparing young people to become teachers who will get better over time. You don't become a highly effective teacher in 2 years. It takes more time than that. And we've got to invest in making the teaching profession an attractive one. For the longest time, we could count on gender bias to get women into teaching because they're going to get jobs in other places. Well, nowadays, women can be anything they want. And so we really have to raise the question, what's going to attract highly skilled people into teaching so they want to stay? We started a model biotech academy when I lived in the Bay Area that is still in existence 22 years later, that has a partnership with 5 biotech companies, 7 high schools, 2 community colleges. It's a model. Every time we trained a teacher to work in the program, they got recruited away by a biotech firm who could pay twice the salary. We have to address this issue. The supply of talent into the profession is a major problem.
So I agree with the sentiments of my fellow panelists, and I would say, sort of calling on on CED and the broader community. One that education the K-12 debate is volatile and insular right now. So one, I would ask you all to do as you do, which is to be more broadly involved in that and help expand that. I think that gets a little bit to the partisan stuff. There's just a real sort of partisan intensity about that. Second is that when engaging with education, that specificity is the soul of credibility. And so I started with the example about the STEM pipeline. A lot of concern about that and the skills mismatch. And so, through, again, looking at sort of AP potential, we identified roughly 215,000 kids who showed AP potential to take a rigorous science course and didn't take it. And 215,000 kids isn't all kids. It doesn't sound like that much, but that's just in 1 year, and that's 4 times the population of Google, and that's still left over to fill NASA twice. So that's how many kids. And so, again, as we think anew about sort of, assessment as the ability to deliver opportunity, but then also this nature of student work and the role of the business community in making that more clear and vivid to them, I think that's an important role in that you all can help provide to help move education forward.
Great on that.
Take a couple questions.
Okay, we've got the time. Fantastic. So, are there questions that people would like to raise out there? I think there's one in the center there. Yes.
Sorry, I'm probably in the line of fire of the light. I apologize. My name is Ben Walter. I'm a CED trustee, and I just wonder if you could comment a little bit on what you said earlier about testing. We hire dozens of young, talented kids out of college. And you talked about, one of the panelists, I think in the last one, talked about millennials. And we actually find that they're not lazy. We find they're very highly motivated. They want to do well. But one of the things we do find, and I talk a lot about this with my colleagues in our trade association, is we find that they really struggle with any sort of ambiguity. It's almost like they walk in the first day and say the equivalent of what's going to be on the test. That's how they start their careers. What do I have to do? Tell me exactly what I have to do. They want a roadmap for everything. So they're smart kids, and I just wonder if you could comment on that, because I do wonder whether we're preparing our students who are going to work in the knowledge economy to live in an unstructured, ambiguous world. We really struggle with this. We don't know how to teach them as an employer how to deal with ambiguity. We don't know how to teach them how to be critical thinkers in an unstructured environment. And I wonder what you think about whether or not education systems are preparing our children for that world.
John, do you want to start us on the response on that?
Well, my general take is that most universities, and I'm talking about four-year institutions with 18 or 19-year-olds, which coming out as undergraduates, do require students to take courses other than their discipline. And they are intended to help people think more about how to solve problems rather than just memorize facts and equations and so on and so forth. And so I think most institutions do that to some extent. The other really interesting thing is, to me, people are saying that people aren't trained for jobs, and yet at the same time, institutions really believe that they're trying to not train people for jobs. I'm talking about academic institutions, four-year universities, but to train or to engage the whole person in being successful at life, not just a specific job. And there's a mismatch between that. And I think that's a really interesting place for business and universities in particular to come together and think through, okay, how do we train more people in problem solving and how to work in teams and that sort of thing. I think universities can do a better job of that. I'm not sure the question has been put to them in quite the right challenging way for them to take that on, but there's a lot of potential there, I think.
I'd recommend a book by a colleague, David Lavery, called How to Succeed at School Without Really Learning. Right? And he talks about the fact that we reward pleasing the teacher. And so many of the students who've done well are experts at that game, but not so good at thinking outside the box, not so good at doing the kinds of things that Stefanie mentioned. So again, it calls for changing what we're doing in schools. Now, we haven't at all mentioned the Common Core standards, and that's an example of something that's going to become highly politicized. But I would challenge anyone that's here to look at the standards and say if there's something there you object to. Right? They're actually, if we did it right, and now that's the big question, do we have the ability to do it right? But if we did it right, those standards would actually raise the bar. It would deepen the kinds of skills kids come out with, increase the amount of research ability, critical thinking that kids are being asked to do while they're in school. Again, right now it's become such a politicized agenda. We have governors, this is how sad it is. Several states now that have said they've gotten rid of the Common Core standards, all they do is call them something else, right? They're still the same standards, they just call them something else now, right? because it's become toxic. But it's sad, but the fact is that we've got to address this issue. How do we prepare our kids to become lifelong learners that will be able to adapt to changes in our society and our economy?
Time for another.
Thank you. I'm Brad Hall. I work as an education consultant in career and technical education, particularly at the secondary level, but have a lot of experience at State Board of Education and working on education reform initiatives. We often try to apply business principles to education, and they often fail because they're different kinds of institutions. One of the things that we could apply and we don't, I find it ironic, is Deming and Deming's idea of total quality management. And we talk about teacher quality, and we're always talking about outcomes and assessments. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about let's control the quality of the process, and we'll get to the fact that they can then embrace ambiguity, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit about what you all see as being what quality process and learning looks like?
Who wants to go first? Stefanie, Pedro?
Sure. We have good research now, and it speaks exactly to your point, because I agree completely, on what are the ingredients that it takes for schools to be successful. All right? And there's 5 essential ingredients: leadership, strong, positive school culture, parent-community engagement, continuous development of the skills of the teachers, and a coherent curriculum. Those are the 5 ingredients. Now the question is, can we make sure that every school is implementing that, right? That's what the job of the State Department of Education should be. That's what the job of the district should be. We should be going into those schools that are not getting results and saying, okay, well, where are they failing? What do we need to shore up? Because what we do in education so often is we implement good ideas poorly. And then we blame the idea, but it's not the idea that failed, it was the implementation. And, so that's what, I'm glad when you said about the technology. If you don't invest in training the teachers on how to use the technology, the kids are ahead. Think about this. Los Angeles spent $1 billion on iPads and almost none on training teachers. They couldn't even, the kids figured out how to get on Facebook right away. So we've got to really make sure that the quality focus is, I think, essential.
Yeah, the mistake, you just pointed out LA, they framed it as a technology initiative, not a learning initiative, and that's the mistake. So
I think it boils down to a principal who does those 5 things and has faculty passionate about doing those 5 things. And those schools that do it, it really works well.
it really does. I mean, institutional inertia is a huge problem in K-12. But what you are finding is, education is so important for the economy, for our future, et cetera, that districts now are holding themselves and outside partners accountable. But what you see when you go to districts across the country and you see transformative districts, it's great leadership. And you have to have incredible leadership to really make that difference. The principal leadership, leadership from the superintendent, the average tenure of urban district superintendent is about 3 years. 3 years. So it really takes somebody special to go into a district, have the courage and conviction to say we're going to do things differently. Because it is a big monumental task, but you're seeing it. I mean, some of the district superintendents, Kaya Henderson, some of the work she's doing in DC Public Schools, it's fantastic. Baltimore County, Chicago Public Schools, they're trying. There's a lot of inertia, but it really takes leadership at the top level and an entire ecosystem coming together. It's not just the central office, it's not just the teachers, it's the principals, it's also the community and the business leaders all coming together to support that district and the implementation that they want to have for that vision.
Yeah, Bill, I think one of the intriguing things I've noticed as I've gone and met Kaya and Alberto and the others is the depth and the length of time it takes to lay down the culture in not only the school but the district to make a difference. And I think one of the risks that we've got is, as we're at this point of so many people talking technology, is what I call the shiny object risk, where people say, look, I brought technology and what I've done is actually I've sent the kids home with some shiny bit of kit and it's not integrated into the system, the curriculum, the learning, the teacher's professional development. And that's the biggest risk we've got. I think what I'd like to do is ask you all to have a huge hand to this fantastic panel.